Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the England Football Learning webinar this evening. And hopefully tonight you'll find out some ideas and be able to share some experiences through the chat with this very knowledgeable team I'm lucky to be with tonight on how might we work with parent carers to create a positive learning environment for our players. So who do we have with us tonight? Well, the dream team you are faced with tonight is Darren Grover, myself, Sharon Muxworthy, Peter Augustine, and Lawrence Lok. And we're all part of the grassroots coach development team. And hopefully we can answer some of your questions and share some scenarios we've encountered in our journey as coaches and as coach developers. And the first objective we're going to look at as a team is what is a positive learning environment and how do we create one? We'll then hopefully go across and share some scenarios and case studies that you may be able to reflect on and recognize as something happening in your own context.
Yeah, I think for me, a positive learning environment is one where whoever's in that environment, whether that's players, parents, coaches, they're having a great time, and that can look different for each of those groups. So, for example, for me, for players, they've got to have an environment where they feel that they're listened to and that they can voice their opinions if necessary. It's a good learning environment, somewhere where they're coming into that environment and they're learning, they're getting new skills, they're getting a chance to test the skills that they already have, and when they test those skills, they're not going to be shouted out or told not to do that. For parents, it's one where it's open, where they can speak to coaches and coaches can give them answers to some of their questions. And it's also one for coaches as well, which is important. I think there's that coaches feel that they can be experimental, they can try stuff, they can test the kids as well. And give them little challenges. I think those things are really key, I think, in having a positive environment. Yeah,
and I think it's quite true what you say, positive learning environment where you do have to let children fail, because as we all know, that the mnemonic for fail is first attempt in learning, and you want them to fail lots of times, but in an environment where it's applauded for their trial, their error, their sense of discovery. And I suppose, that's what parents want to see, because at the end of the day, they are handing over their most precious thing to you. That there's nothing more precious than your own child, and they're entrusting you with their child, and they want you to help develop that child to be the best player, but even more so, the best person that they can possibly be. Working with parents can be a challenge. You've got to schedule playing time for all the players, the level of success, the style of play, the player roles. They can all be causes, can't they, of conflict sometimes. And I think, as it says here, but if you get your interactions right, parents can play such a huge part in helping you to develop those players to be really skillful and thrive in that environment where they fall in love with the game. And that's what we want them to do, ideally, is to fall in love with the game and be a lifelong part of that community with lifelong friends. And, that includes parents as well. We need their support as well.
I think when we're talking to parents, we've got to understand that we might see these kids for an hour and a half. If games as well, training, we're going to see them for a maximum of about 4 hours, 5 hours a week, like maximum. We've got to understand that these parents are spending the rest of the time with their parent or with the children and the parents all together. So it's that understanding that a connection has to be made with them, even if they're not our primary person that we're trying to help develop and lead and encourage to be better at our end goal of better footballer and better people. But just making that connection with the parents and the carers and the ones who bring them there, because longer term, having a relationship with a parent or the person who brings them there or the family unit might help us with those bit of insights on how we can help develop the child and the player themselves, especially up to 16. I remember times where I'd go to training and I put a brave face on, but then suddenly it's like my managers just give me a bit of slack because I've had a really bad day at school and I've not done great. But I know that my mum's had a quick chat with the coach, then they're able to give me that. So those relationships for me are the initial ones, because I think as Pete said, if we can get that right at the beginning, then it can help us further down the line with all the other stuff that we're trying to do. And if nothing else, it's to get them on side with the empathy so everyone knows that this isn't an easy job we're doing, but it's definitely a worthwhile one.
Yeah, I think you're so right. That building of relationships, and I always think it's best to educate to appreciate is a little thing, and like everyone will appreciate what you're doing if you actually share what your aim is, what your values, what you're trying to do. So, as it says in the slide there, it's like ideally build those relationships first. Yes, because there's no one who knows their child better than a parent. So why not use them as a resource so you can ensure that you get the best, you can provide the best experience for that child. You know the best way maybe to communicate with them, whether it's, using the whiteboard, a walkthrough, a show, parents can sometimes help with that. And also, if there's a lot of children and parents from the same school, there might be a system they have for managing behaviour that some parents can say, oh, the thing that they all do in school is this. And if you can have some consistency in working with those children, that's also recognised and familiar with the parents, it's easier for both parties to accept, isn't it? Because the parents are aware of why it's done that way because of the school. And then that entrusts the fact, well, coach does it well. They really got a great understanding of pedagogy here.
I think linking back to that, Sharon, like there's been a few people writing in the chat around it being a challenge. So Desmond, Carl, George actually wrote around challenging and parents are a challenge. And I think other people have counteracted that by explaining the why. So we've put that on there, and a lot of people in the chat have given the why. So, it's really important that parents at the start of the season explain why you're doing things and involve them in that process. Because if you don't, and you only see them when they drop the kids off and there's no communication in between or before, then there's a breakdown in communication. So just linking back to what everyone's saying in the chat box, and there's some really, really good comments, some really powerful comments and inspirational comments. And it's essentially giving parents an understanding of why you're doing things. So whether you're playing a certain formation, whether you're rotating positions, whether you're doing certain activities in your training sessions, then long as the parents understand why you're doing it, then hopefully they'll be on board with you.
Working with parents, what have you come across, Darren? What do you want to share?
So yeah, when I was thinking about this, some of the common concerns and some of the things that I faced as a coach, I sort of thought back over the last couple of years, and I thought one of the bits that I've had, which strangely I felt a little bit offended at the time, being really honest, is that parents complaining a bit of a lack of feedback from me or from the coaches that I work with. And I was there thinking, like, I know that I'm giving information to the kids, and I know I'm giving a bit of information to the parents. But if I'm being really brutally honest, it's that whole thing that perhaps I didn't give enough care to the relationship that I have with the parent or the carer, and I just had a presumption that the player that I work with will then pass on the message. But realistically, I'm working with, at the time, it would have been 14, 15-year-old boys. And those of you who ever worked in that will know that they probably don't pass the messages on. So the feedback that I thought was really in depth about using the four-corner model and understanding that, perhaps it didn't get all the way through. So although from my point of view, I was doing it, from the point of view from the people listening, they weren't necessarily getting it. So one of the big things I would say is changing my practice, and I've seen it come up quite a few times inside the chat box, is things like having meetings at the beginning of the season to go, this is what we're trying to do, and giving care to the individual player, because yes, they are part of a team, but they are still an individual person with individual feelings and individual family units. So having maybe taking the time to go, look, here's the big points. A lot of the academies and the sections like some accredited youth sections. They'll have almost parents' evenings. And not for a second are we saying every week, do it every week, real detailed, independent development plans for every single child all the time, because realistically, we probably don't have the time to do that. But maybe once the beginning, once near Christmas, once near the end, just to help people on a bit of a journey that takes it all the way back to that relationship things. If I was there and I was a parent and I was being told this is going to help your son and daughter get better, from my opinion, then I'm probably going to take that on board to go, okay, I know what you're saying. How can I help? Because at the end of the day, I want my child to get the best experience from it. So, yeah, so that whole bit about parents complaining about lack of feedback, it's things like open lines of communication, being honest, being open, and finally using a mirror to reflect sometimes and accepting, do you know what's going on in your head might not be how it's always coming across, even with the best intentions.
Yeah, I think from, for as long as I've been coaching, I think always the big one for me was parents believing that success was winning. So I always question myself, like, what does success look like? Now, success for some parents might be winning the game 5-0. Success for the parents might be getting Dexter to turn up to football and engage in training for the rest of the session. Others might be, getting a group of players to communicate and learn and want to be there to play football. So I think one of the things I tried to overcome with this was at the start of the season, defining what success looked like for the team. So if we go back to I coached an under-15 team when I was quite new to coaching. There were under 16 players, and on paper, and this is what I got told in the first year, was that they needed to win that league, and I was under pressure to win a league. And it was like my second year coaching grassroots football. I was 22 at the time, and there was loads of pressure from parents because a lot of the players were, they've been at professional academies, they were released, and they were going to win this league that we're in. And I was relatively new into coaching, and I had a lot of pressure from these parents going, you better win the league. And I'm like, don't even know these kids. And I remember that first year for me, success was getting to know them, getting them to understand like my values and the values of the club and how we can get them to play football next year and continue playing football. And I remember that year, I think we lost all our games bar one. And it links to, I think Debbie wrote it around, there were a lot of dads trying to coach on the side, telling me I'd play in the wrong formation. We needed to get rid of players. We needed to sign new players. And it's like, no, this is a group that I want to work with, and we just need them to buy into the process. And the following year, we kept the same players, but the following year we did a lot better. So success was engaging them in the process, getting them to be friends. And the following year we did really well. And it wasn't about winning, but it got that group of players to continue playing football. And I think success for me wasn't about winning the league, wasn't about winning the cup. I think one of the biggest successes was about 10 years down the line. I remember walking through the city centre from where I lived, and one of the players came up to me and went, how are you doing, Lawrence? Like, how are you doing? I've got kids myself now and I'm starting coaching. So success wasn't about us winning the league the second year round or winning the cup or, having a really successful season. It was about getting those kids engaged. And I think once parents know what your why is, and when we start to integrate them throughout the season. So when we talked about getting those dads who were on the sideline trying to coach to, can you just help do some analysis for me so it helps me in the future? Or can you watch the team and give me some feedback at half time? They're the things that I started to do with those dads who were trying to tell me about what formation to play, telling me which players to pick, who to take off. But I gave them little jobs that probably naively I probably didn't think about. But looking forward, it was engaging them in a different way. So they looked at it, and linking back to Pete's point, like they looked at it from a different lens. And that really helped around telling them what success looked like.
And I always use the lionesses as an example when I'm with the girls. I always say it's about the team behind the team. And I always say to the parents, just like the lionesses had their team behind them, all the other coaches, the physio, you're the team behind the team. And so making it clear that the parents are part of the team, and the team needs their support, not just their child, the team. So that could be like try and arrive on time when possible, but at least communicate if there is a problem with timings. Just communicate so we know and we can support you. Help set up if you're available, if you're able to in some sort of way, and also help and support after training. And one of my coaches then said that they've had a player who's doing really well, playing up a year group. But the parent in this situation, and they're a club that's all about positivity, but the parent's pretty hard on this player, consistently telling them what they've done wrong, even though they might have done 100 things right in a match, they focus on the negative. So, and they noticed that this was happening a lot in sort of tournaments. So what the coach then did, and they had 2 of them, so it was it's a bit nicer when you have an assistant to support you, to be fair. So always try and recruit one when you can. And they now sort of block parents from being the first. They have a sort of protocol. As soon as the match finishes, all the players go to the coach, and the parents are allowed to listen, but they're not allowed to intervene. You know, it's been said. And that's when the coaches give all the feedback, and they get all the players' feedback about what they did well, and then maybe what they might going to work on next training session. And they're now going to, as well, in the new season, they've put in a new thing for parents, and they've got a meeting with the parents where they want the first thing the parents have to say is something that made them proud, that they saw their child or player do today. So it could be after the match, oh, I was really proud when I saw how you, you made that run through and you were brave. You did a 1v1, and that made me really proud of you, rather than, saying something negative.
For me, it's funny because I also coached my brother many years ago when he was a lot younger, and I also coached my youngest son, and how I was when I coached my brother was totally different to how I am with my youngest son. One of the things that I said to him was that when we're at football, I'm your coach, but as soon as the game's over, I'm back to dad again. And when we're in the car, if you want to talk about the game, you can. If you don't, you don't have to. And the last thing I always say to him before he goes to play is go and enjoy it. And me and the coach, he also has a son in the team. What we made a decision was that I wouldn't give advice to my son. He would give it to him, and I would give advice to his son. So there wasn't that dad-son kind of conflict piece. So it didn't feel like you were always picking on him, because that couldn't be. I mean, as a parent, sometimes you want your child to do well. I was also very careful to make sure that the playing time was equal, so that if my son my son wouldn't stay on in the game all the time, he had to come off just like everyone else. So just by having those basic rules in place, I found it very easy to manage, and it never seemed to be a problem.
Yeah, it's a really good, valid points from both of you around communication, not being too harsh. And I think David's put on there, he sacrifices his own son's playing time. So, I think what you've both said, it's treat them like any other player. You're always going to be their parent. You're never not going to be their parent. But at the same time, you are the coach. So it is finding that balance and agreeing with your assistants. So making sure you've got assistants there to help you. But it's probably one that we see a lot, especially with the coaches we visit. And I've seen it myself where you see, in the cases I've seen, it's like the dad who's harsher on his son, or he'll tell his son off rather than telling other players off, and he'll take his son off first. So it's the things that, we want to make sure that the kids, we talk about an environment where they all want to be there. So what we don't want is, a son and daughter not wanting to go to football because mum and dad are treating them differently, and then when they get back in the car, it carries on. So what we want is, you know, you're there as a parent, you're there as a coach, and it's finding that balance and you know, setting out your stall, you know, not treating them any different is really important. And some really, really good points from Darren and Pete there.